Across the wind-swept plains of Arizona, where once proud horses now quietly waited for their last days, lay a Mustang that could no longer rise, completely paralyzed, forgotten, and hopeless. But on one April morning, a little girl in a wheelchair, with wild curls and a pair of eyes that sparkled like stardust, placed her small hand on the stallion's forehead. From that moment on, something impossible began to stir. No one knew then that these two souls the world had crossed off would soon change everything. Before the sun had fully risen, a thin veil of fog crept through the cracks in the old barn walls, draping the Ash Fork prairie in a pale gray shroud. The sky hung heavy with moisture, and the first light of day wasn't strong enough to chase away the clammy cold. But it didn't stop the warm breaths of horses from curling into the air like wisps of smoke inside the stalls. Out west of Blue Pine Ranch, where the wind whispered through aging pine trees and kicked up red dust across the open prairie, Sam Whitmore tightened the leather strap of his hat, his eyes fixed on the fence line near the training ring. He had spent a lifetime with horses, trained some of the finest bloodlines, once stood still with breath caught as his horse moved with uncanny precision at the Colorado State Fair. But time, as it always does, had worn him down. His calloused hands now could barely lift a brush, and on mornings thick with mist like this one, his aging eyes took longer to find focus. Beside him, Laura, his wife with warm tea-colored eyes and a voice as steady as spring wind, was gently massaging the shoulder of Cedar, the Mustang stallion they both considered their last child. Cedar stood quietly in the stall, his chestnut coat glistening like copper under the dim morning light. 9 years old, strong and once unstoppable in Liberty riding. But what made Cedar truly special wasn't just his grace without reins, it was the way he could see into a person's soul. He once bowed his head so a child with autism could touch his brow. He once stopped mid-session, sensing a student's panic long before anyone else did. "Ready, boy?" Laura whispered, pressing her cheek to Cedar's neck. He gave a slight nod, ears flickering gently. This morning was supposed to be a simple walk around the sand arena, but the ground was still slick from last night's rain. Sam hesitated, yet still took the lead rope and guided Cedar out of the stall, past the old birch tree that had marked the beginning of every lesson for years. No one saw what happened first. Maybe it was the flap of a crow's wings from the treetops. Maybe it was the shadow of a rabbit darting by the fence line. But the sound of metal shoes slipping on wet dirt, the weight of a body crashing to the earth like timber off a roof, then Sam's voice breaking through the silence, calling for Laura. It split the quiet morning like lightning through a cloudless sky. Laura came running. Sam was already on his knees beside Cedar. The stallion lay on his side, hind legs curled in, trembling. His eyes, once deep and steady like an old well, now shimmered with panic, leaking a kind of fear that left the old couple speechless. Cedar tried to rise, but only his front legs moved. His back end remained frozen, like stone. Don't move, Cedar. Please don't," Laura pleaded, clutching his mane as if holding on to something that hadn't shattered yet. Dr. Miriam Easton arrived within 30 minutes. The region's most seasoned vet, she once saved a paralyzed quarter horse that had collapsed in a barn near Winslow. She came with a heavy bag of tools and her trademark look of quiet confidence. But this time, her brow furrowed and didn't relax. Her hands moved gently down Cedar's spine, over swollen joints, across a hip already bruising deep purple. At first, she said nothing. Sam gripped his hat so tight it left a mark on his forehead. Laura barely breathed, eyes locked on Cedar's rising chest. Finally, Dr. Easton sat on the wooden ledge outside the stall and placed a hand softly on Laura's shoulder. "Spinal trauma," she said quietly. "Severe swelling, L3 to L5. I can't say if he'll ever walk again." No one spoke. The sounds from nearby stalls, the clip of hooves, the quiet nickers, felt like they belonged to another world entirely. Laura slowly sat down beside Cedar, her hand never leaving his chest. "Is there any chance?" Sam asked, voice like sandpaper. "If there is," Dr. Easton replied, "it'll be a miracle, and miracles don't come from us." Word traveled fast around the ranch. Former students, riders, people Cedar had once helped conquer their fear of horses began returning. They brought carrots, apples, peppermint, everything he loved. Some just stood at the fence, too afraid to look inside. Sam and Laura never mentioned the word euthanasia. but everyone knew. They saw Dr. Easton's private medical bag. They saw test results from the Flagstaff clinic. And most of all, they saw Cedar, the once free-moving spirit, now lying still, struggling to lift his head whenever someone approached. The days grew quieter. No more morning whistles, no sound of hooves circling the ring. Other students still came for lessons, but each one slowed their step as they passed stall number 4, Cedar's stall. Laura lit candles inside. Sam sat on a wooden bench for hours, lifting and lowering his cowboy hat in silence. At night, the wind moaned through the fences. Cedar lay still under candlelight, and Sam sighed. He used to be the horse no one dared to touch. Now it feels like the whole world's preparing to let him go. Not the whole world, Laura said, eyes fixed on the still figure. I'm still here, and I know someone else will be too. They didn't notice the small figure watching from the eastern field. A little girl perched on the back seat of her mother's bike. Her legs dangled, her backpack was too big for her frame, and her wide eyes were locked on the faint light glowing from Cedar's stall. Her name was Maisie Carter, and she had never believed in the word impossible. The dirt road leading to Blue Pine Ranch had deep ruts left by rain, but Maisie Carter didn't care. She sat on the back of her mother's bicycle, arms wrapped around a backpack nearly as big as she was. Inside were carrots, apples, a tattered fairy tale book with a broken spine, and a box of crayons she carried like treasure. Maisie was 6, small for her age at Ash Fork Elementary. She had a slight speech impediment, often needing to repeat herself before adults understood. But Cedar never needed that. From the moment they met, he understood her. He didn't need words, just the gentle look in her eyes and a small hand resting on his neck. Maisie had met Cedar when she was only 4, before she even knew how to tie her shoes. Back then, Cedar was the star of the ranch, the kind of horse seasoned trainers spoke of in reverence. Yet when Maisie had tiptoed toward him, he didn't lift his head, didn't snort like he usually did with strangers. He simply lowered his head and nudged the pocket where she'd hidden 2 peppermint candies. From that day forward, they were inseparable. Every Tuesday after school, Hannah Carter, Maisie's mother, would pedal her to riding lessons. It started with brushing the horses, then learning reins, and finally balance training. But Maisie's favorite part was always before and after class. Those quiet moments by Cedar's stall where she'd tell him everything. Who got in trouble at school, how hard the math test was, or how her little brother kept stealing her crayons. When Maisie overheard her mother mention Cedar's accident, something cracked inside her. She didn't understand what spinal trauma meant, nor could she grasp euthanasia. But she noticed how serious her mom's face got on the phone. She heard Sam's voice tremble as he said, "Maybe it's time." Maisie understood one thing: Cedar was sad, and no one was doing anything about it. That afternoon after school, Maisie didn't go to the riding ring. She slipped around the back path, avoiding the noisy horses in the big paddock, and crept toward stall number 4. Cedar lay on his side, head resting on a bed of straw. His ear twitched at her footsteps, then relaxed when he recognized her scent. "Hi, buddy," Maisie whispered, sitting cross-legged by the gate and pulling out 2 carrots. "Mom said you can't stand up, but she also said my brother wouldn't play again after he got sick. And now he's back to playing, so maybe." Cedar didn't move, but his gaze softened. He pressed his nose gently to her hand, as if accepting the comfort. The next day, Maisie returned with her old fairy tale book. She sat and read out loud, her voice shaky, forgetting words and mispronouncing half of them. But she didn't stop. Cedar remained still, ears flicking gently with every syllable. When Hannah came to pick her up, she found Maisie resting her head against the stall gate, and Cedar reaching his muzzle toward her curls. "What are you doing, sweetie?" Hannah asked as they walked to the bike. "I was telling Cedar about the little fairy. She met a dragon today but wasn't scared, just like Cedar." "Sweetheart, Cedar's very hurt," Hannah sighed. "He may not." "But he hasn't given up yet, Mom," Maisie cut in, her eyes wide. "He looked at me like he was trying. He just doesn't know how to get up." That night, Maisie couldn't sleep. She tossed, whispered to herself, then suddenly got up and started digging through her crayon box. Hannah, passing by her room, paused. She saw her daughter lying on the floor, drawing on blank sheets of paper. There was a horse, 4 legs dangling, suspended by red straps connected to something that looked like a life jacket. "What's that, honey?" Hannah asked, kneeling beside her. "A flying vest for horses," Maisie mumbled without looking up. Hannah smiled, then froze. She studied the drawing. The horse floated in midair, its feet lightly grazing the ground, suspended by soft straps. Underneath were small wheels, almost like a moving platform. "Where did you see this?" "At the hospital. The thing you used for Mr. Bob. When he fell, you used that belt to help him stand again. This is like that, but bigger." Hannah fell silent. She used to be a physical therapy nurse at the rehab center in Prescott. She had helped stroke patients walk again with harnesses and support rigs. She had never once considered doing it for a horse. Maisie kept drawing, now adding green pastures behind cedar. Then she paused, looked up at her mother. "If people can learn to walk again, why can't horses, Mom?" That question pierced Hannah like a pin to the heart. Not because it was wrong, but because adults never dared to ask it. The next morning, Hannah called her old friend Trent Davison, a rehab equipment engineer based in Flagstaff. He had successfully built mobility rigs for Parkinson's patients, soft strap systems connected to adjustable suspension frames. "Trent, I know this sounds crazy, but if a child can imagine it, maybe it's not crazy at all." That day, Maisie brought her stack of drawings to Blue Pine Ranch. She didn't go to class. She stood in front of the main office, knocked softly on the glass, and held her paper up to Sam and Laura inside. "Excuse me," she said in her small voice. "Can I show you something for Cedar? I think I know how to help him get up." Sam took the paper, frowning. Laura covered her mouth, eyes welling up, partly from emotion, partly because deep down they wanted to believe a miracle was still possible. Dr. Miriam Easton arrived just in time. She took the drawing from Laura, stared at it for several minutes, then sat down, propping her chin on her hand. "This has potential. If it's made from light material, if the weight distribution is precise, and if we have time." Maisie blinked. "I've got time. Cedar does too. Just don't give up so fast, okay?" That afternoon, a thick fog still clung to Ash Fork. But inside the little ranch office at Blue Pine Ranch, a new kind of blueprint had begun. Born from a green crayon and the hand of a 6-year-old girl who had never believed in the word impossible. Mornings in Flagstaff, Arizona, were always a few degrees colder than Ash Fork. The pine-scented wind from the northern peaks slipped through the third-floor windows of an old building on Humphreys Avenue into a small workshop where Trent Davison, a nearly 40-year-old rehabilitation engineer with patchy beard stubble and a faded flannel shirt, was adjusting elastic straps on a patient lift rig. His phone rang. The caller ID read, "Hannah Carter, Ash Fork." Trent answered in his usual calm tone, "Hey Hannah, everything all right?" Hannah didn't waste time. She told him about Cedar, the fall, the haunting eyes, the silence in the stall, and about Maisie, the little girl with wild drawings that had shaken the heart of a ranch. "Trent," she thinks, "if people can learn to walk again with harnesses, then horses can too." There was a pause. Trent didn't laugh. He didn't call it crazy. He just asked, "How much does the horse weigh?" "Around 1,100 pounds. A Mustang. Broad-chested." "What's the spinal damage?" "L3 to L5. Major swelling. No fractures. Hind legs completely paralyzed." "I'll be there in 2 days." That very afternoon, Blue Pine Ranch buzzed with more energy than it had in weeks. Sam still wasn't fully convinced. He stood with arms crossed, studying Maisie's drawing, now enlarged and pinned to the bulletin board. Every part, the belly strap, the overhead suspension lines, the wheels beneath, was color-coded by Trent. Beside each section were scribbled notes in a child's handwriting. Cedar gets up, Cedar goes outside, Cedar runs. Laura brewed nonstop coffee. She handed out sandwiches and lemonade to whoever showed up. Dr. Easton brought in 2 supply crates, one containing a plastic model of an equine spine. And just past noon, a new figure walked in. Benji Alvarez, a wiry 16-year-old with ink-stained fingers and a mop of jet-black hair. Benji was the nephew of a former ranch worker. When he heard someone needed help building a mechanical frame for a horse, he showed up immediately. He had built a movable skeleton for physics class, repaired motorcycles across town, and loved horses, a passion his mother once dismissed as romantic nonsense. "I think I can help with the rotation joints. If we use a dual-axis setup, it'll give more flexibility, Benji said, eyes sparkling as he examined the design. Trent looked at him, then turned to Sam. I like this kid. Over the next 2 days, the small shed behind the barn transformed into an improvised workshop. Sam cleared out the hay bales, stretched a tarp overhead, and wired power from the stables. Blueprints, welding tools, cutters, laptops, elastic cords, foam padding, everything was arranged like a university lab. Maisie came every day. She sat in a corner and sketched new versions of Cedar, wearing wing vests, riding a horse bike, even flying over hills under the caption, "Cedar learns to fly." Everyone smiled, but no one dismissed her. From her childlike sketches, Trent recalculated suspension angles, cable arcs, and height settings so that Cedar could feel the ground without putting full weight on his hind legs. Benji never stopped tinkering. He added a swiveling hook, redesigned the base with wheels that allowed smooth movement inside the stall. Dr. Easton double-checked every strap, stress point, and contact area on a foam model to ensure absolute safety. Any misaligned pressure could worsen the trauma, she warned. We don't get a second chance. Sam, who had initially opposed the whole idea, soon became the logistical anchor. He brewed coffee, carried water, and occasionally just watched from a distance. But in his eyes, Laura noticed something she hadn't seen in years. One afternoon, when Cedar stirred at the sound of Maisie's voice, Sam muttered through gritted teeth, "There's still fire in him." When the final structure was ready, everyone was exhausted. The frame, gleaming silver, stood nearly stall height. Its height and width could be adjusted. The straps were padded, each anchor tested thoroughly. But the greatest challenge remained: how to lift Cedar into it without causing further damage. We'll need to remove one stall wall, Dr. Easton said, and 8 people. Exactly 8. No margin for error. Sam called in every willing hand. 2 young ranch hands from next door, a neighbor named Walt, a retired firefighter, and a couple from Prescott who had read the story online and volunteered. That morning, Cedar was gently brought out. He no longer panicked like before. When he saw Maisie holding a slice of apple in the distance, his head reached for her instinctively. 4 people supported his front half. 4 handled the rear. Dr. Easton led every step. Ropes tightened, the frame creaked, wheels rolled softly over the earth. The tension in the air was breathless. Cedar was suspended. Everyone held still. The straps held steady. His massive body floated gently just above the ground. His 4 hooves brushed the floor. Exactly like Maisie's drawing, Trent exhaled. He's hovering. From the corner of the stall, Maisie watched with wide eyes. She gripped her mother's hand, whispering, "Now it's Cedar's turn to try." Dr. Easton gave a nod. Trent began lowering the weight distribution. Cedar's body shook, muscles twitched, sweat beaded on foreheads. "Come on, boy," Sam said softly, stepping forward. "We're not quitting this time." In that moment, Cedar tilted his head, braced his front legs, and pushed. He trembled, strained, then slowly lifted half his frame. Maisie's voice rang out first. "He's trying. Cedar's trying to stand." And then it happened. The sound they had all waited weeks to hear, not music, not applause, but the soft clink of a horseshoe tapping earth, unsteady, uncertain, but real. A sound that carried more hope than any medicine. The miracle didn't begin with a bang, it began with a whisper. Inside a quiet stall, a whisper that said, the impossible was trying. Cedar stood for 3 seconds on Monday, 5 seconds on Tuesday afternoon, 7 seconds by Wednesday. Each time the Mustang stallion pushed himself up inside the rig, the ranch held its breath. There were no applause, no dramatic fireworks, just the soft tension of taut ropes, the gentle creak of padded straps, and the heavy breathing of a creature learning how to live again. Maisie sat quietly in the corner of the stall, eyes never leaving Cedar. Her sketchbook was now filled with drawings. Cedar in the meadow, Cedar walking beside her, Cedar with wings. But above them all was one sentence in shaky purple crayon: "I believe in you." That Wednesday morning, Sam installed a small speaker in the stall's corner. Each time Cedar stood or took a step, he'd play country music, soft and slow. Cedar seemed to like it. His ears relaxed, his head tilted toward the melody like he was listening to a memory long forgotten. Trent was constantly tweaking. He measured angles, adjusted the shoulder padding, recalibrated the tension on the rig's suspension. Benji and Laura added rolling wheels under the rig, allowing Cedar to walk inside the stall without being pushed. Dr. Easton checked muscle groups daily, tracking neural responses, teaching them where to press and how to massage the deeper tissue. "We're not just teaching him to walk," she said one day. "We're waking up his nervous system." Benji tilted his head. "So, like plugging wires back in?" Dr. Easton smiled. "Yes, but these wires carry emotion, memory, life. The hard part wasn't the equipment, it was endurance." Even with the rig reducing most of his weight, Cedar had to summon all his strength just to stay balanced. Once, during a session, his hind leg slipped off the mat. His body tilted dangerously. Trent and Sam jumped forward to steady the frame. But what shocked everyone wasn't the slip, it was Cedar's response. He didn't panic. He didn't thrash. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and shifted his stance, finding his balance again on his own. Maisie saw everything. That night, she drew Cedar standing in the rain, not trembling but holding his head high. Word began to spread, not in newspapers or TV spots, but through voices across town. "There's a paralyzed horse that stood up." Third graders drew his picture on the whiteboard. "A little girl is teaching a horse to walk again." One afternoon, an old pickup truck parked quietly at the ranch gate. A retired soldier with a limp stepped out. He didn't speak. He simply watched as Cedar took slow, deliberate steps in the frame, then turned and left. On his back window, a Purple Heart decal, Vietnam veteran. Later, Laura told them, "He only said one thing before he drove off. I thought nothing could make me believe again." But not every day was full of hope. Some mornings, Cedar refused to move. Other days, he thrashed, bit at the straps, kicked in frustration. Sam once pulled Trent aside. "He's just like us. Some days are good, some aren't." Then came a morning where fog still blanketed the hills. The ranch awoke to a strange sound, rhythmic, faint, the clip of hooves, again and again. Everyone ran to the stall. Cedar was walking, alone, inside the frame. His hooves moved slowly, evenly, as if he'd waited for the world to stop watching so he could try for himself. Maisie screamed, "He's walking! He's walking!" The ranch exploded with joy. Sam sat on the floor, hands on his head. Trent forgot to film, just stood there, tears streaming. Laura trembled as she whispered, "Dear God, he's walking." Dr. Easton stood still. She had never seen a patient, human or horse, cross that line without drugs, without force. And when she turned to the corner of the stall, she saw Maisie standing there, hand over her chest, wide-eyed. An hour later, a new sketch appeared in Maisie's book. Cedar, standing tall in the open fields, no rig, legs strong. Behind him, hundreds of people clapping. Benji put a hand on her shoulder and said, "We're about to witness something no one's ever seen." Maisie shook her head gently. "No, we're about to make it happen." By the 15th day, Cedar took 10 steps on his own. No falling. They weren't strong steps, not the gallop of his younger days, but to an 8-year-old girl, and to a small ranch that had once fallen silent, they were the steps of a warrior returning from the brink. Then came the video. Benji had filmed it on an old phone. He posted it to a horse rescue group online. In 3 days, over 300,000 views. The caption read, "They said he'd never stand again." But one little girl refused to believe that. That morning, no one at the ranch knew they were about to witness something miraculous. The sky was pale, the sun filtering through a silvery veil like light behind thin linen. It cast soft beams across the old wooden fence and the dusty red soil of Ash Fork. Roosters crowed in the distance, wind rustled through the pines, just another day or so it seemed. But for Cedar and the Whitmore family, it would never be just another day again. Benji arrived first, toolbox in hand, phone in his pocket, and a grease-streaked marker behind his ear. He checked the rig wheels underneath the Hope rig, tightened 2 bolts, and looked over at Cedar resting quietly in the stall. The stallion's eyes were open, glassy and alert, like he knew today meant something. Dr. Easton came next, holding a clipboard filled with carefully drawn boxes and check marks. Yesterday, Cedar had maintained balance for nearly 4 minutes, the longest since the accident. She nodded at Benji, offering a quiet, hopeful look. But it was Laura who brought the shift in energy. She placed a wreath of fresh meadow flowers around Cedar's neck and whispered, "Today, you only do what feels right, not for us, for you." Maisie walked beside her, holding a new drawing, Cedar standing on an American flag, surrounded by dozens of children, hands over their hearts. Sam remained at the back of the stall, silent. Since declaring, "I won't let anyone take away his last chance," He'd said little, but something in the way he moved, lighter steps, softer eyes, revealed change. The session began at 8:15. Trent checked the cables and gently secured the soft straps around Cedar's body. Laura hugged Maisie tightly. Dr. Easton powered up the heart rate monitor and readied the oxygen, just in case. Benji lifted his phone and went live on the Southwest Equine Recovery Group page, which had been following Cedar's journey for weeks. "Final test day," he whispered into the stream. "Either Cedar walks on his own, or we go back to square one." Trent turned the crank. The Hope rig slowly raised Cedar, inch by inch. His muscles, after nearly a month of rehab, showed tone again. Not like before, but enough to hold. Cedar stretched his neck forward, breathing heavier. The system stopped at its lowest supportive level, just enough to catch him if he fell. The rest was up to him. 1 second. 2. All 4 hooves on the ground, trembling. Cedar shivered. Benji held his breath. Trent took a step back. 7 seconds. Cedar moved his front left hoof. The iron shoe tapped against the floor, a sound so soft yet echoing like thunder through the stall. 1 step. Another. By step 5, he wasn't leaning on the rig anymore. He was walking, on his own. Maisie burst into tears by the rail. "You did it, boy. You're standing." Cedar raised his head and looked at her. No one could explain what happened next. But in that moment, something inside the horse shifted. Not just muscle, not just instinct. He understood. He hadn't fought all this way just to stand. He had fought to live. Sam stepped forward, hand on Laura's shoulder. "I've seen what I needed to see." He took off his cowboy hat, lowered his head slowly toward Cedar. For the first time in all his years of ranching, bowing not to man nor memory, but to a creature the world had already given up on. Benji's video captured the whole thing. Just 1 minute and 27 seconds. But it moved more people than any speech, any article, any charity ever could. The caption read, "The day Cedar stood, not to return to the arena, but to teach us how to rise again when everything says we can't." Within 24 hours, tens of thousands of shares. Emails from wild horse sanctuaries across the country. A call from the University of Colorado asking to interview Dr. Easton. An outreach from a Utah equine therapy center wanting to pilot the Hope rig. But the message that touched them most was a handwritten letter from a family in Texas. It read, "Our son had a spinal injury. He refused physical therapy. But after seeing Cedar's video, he said, 'If a horse can do it, so can I. Thank you for not giving up.'" Dr. Easton and Trent immediately began drafting a technical manual, outlining the installation process, physical therapy stages, and neurological response protocols for equine spinal injuries. Benji was assigned to film everything, photograph each stage, document every inch. In the small ranch office behind the stalls, they mounted a wooden plaque with red letters, "Hope Rig, inspired by Maisie Carter, age 8. No trademarks, no buzzwords, just a reminder of where real miracles begin. A child's belief in a horse no one else believed in." That weekend, Cedar was walked to the backfield for the first time. No rig, just a soft lead rope and his hind legs still unsteady, but he stepped forward, slow, deliberate, determined. Maisie walked beside him, holding the lead, beaming. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Cedar knew. From a distance, Sam, Laura, Dr. Easton, Trent, and Benji all watched. No one said a word. They didn't need to. The sun sank behind the pines, casting long amber light across the land, illuminating a horse once fallen, now walking, toward a life renewed. Ever since the day Cedar stood up in the Hope rig, Blue Pine Ranch was no longer just a place for riding lessons or show training. It changed, quietly, deeply, just as Cedar had changed after the fall that nearly ended everything. The empty wooden stalls were remodeled into rehab bays. The once quiet pathways echoed with the slow shuffle of hooves, the gentle hum of machines, and the sound of children laughing in the late afternoon sun. The ranch had become an unofficial therapy center, a place where animals once marked as hopeless found their second chance. Cedar never returned to the spotlight of show arenas, but he didn't need to. The chestnut Mustang had become something greater, the first teacher of a new generation. Not for his balance or grace, but because he stood as living proof of faith and perseverance. On a chilly morning in early December, a rusted pickup truck from Utah rumbled up to the ranch gates. A tall man stepped out, followed by a thin boy around 8 years old with curly hair and hollow cheeks. In the truck bed stood a pale brown horse, rear leg bandaged, trembling from fear and exhaustion. "His name's Percy," the man told Sam as they shook hands. "He tried to jump a fence, hurt himself bad. Nobody wants to take him. But my son, Noah, he saw the Cedar video and wouldn't let it go." Noah didn't speak, but as he walked toward Cedar's stall, he reached out and touched the wood. Then, just barely, he smiled. Maisie met Noah for the first time in the sand paddock where Cedar took his morning walks. She waved first, a little shy. Noah said nothing, his eyes locked on Cedar's legs that had once been frozen, now walking slow but steady. "You don't talk?" Maisie asked. Noah shook his head, then reached out his hand, not to shake hers, but to invite her closer. No words. Just a quiet connection. Cedar walked toward them, lowered his head, and gently brushed Noah's cheek. The boy exhaled, something between a sigh and a laugh. Then he whispered, for the first time, "Hi, buddy." Dr. Easton, watching from afar, turned away quietly, eyes glistening. Sam still woke early. Though he no longer trained horses for shows, he walked the stalls, checked the hope-rig systems, and tracked each horse's progress in a weathered notebook. He didn't speak as much, but there was calmness in him now, like he had finally understood that control wasn't about force, but about trust and letting go. One afternoon, he watched Maisie walking Cedar. She talked the whole time, about building a bike for horses, about becoming an engineer like Mr. Trent. Cedar listened, pausing every so often, nodding gently as if he agreed. Sam chuckled, a sound soft and rare. Laura approached, 2 cups of warm tea in her hands. "You know," she said, "Cedar's not a miracle, he's a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Sam asked. "That we don't quit, even when we think we've lost everything." The hope rig was refined weekly. Trent added adjustable brake wheels. Benji coded a phone app to control the lift remotely. Dr. Easton partnered with students from Arizona State to begin building the first equine spinal rehab protocol in the country. But the best idea still came from Maisie. One day, she handed Trent a new sketch, 2 wooden beams crisscrossed with little emotion lights above the stall. She explained, "If the horse is sad, it turns blue. If it's happy, it turns yellow." Trent laughed, then sat down beside her. "You know, you might not need to wait until you're grown up to be an engineer." Benji nudged her shoulder. "Dr. Easton says you could be a vet, too." Maisie tilted her head, thought for a moment. "Then I'll do both." Word of Blue Pine Ranch spread far. They didn't advertise. No flyers, no magazine spreads. But family by family, child by child, video by video. The story of Cedar traveled like a quiet storm. A Mustang sanctuary in Colorado requested a hope rig. A teen girl in Nevada, recovering from a car accident, asked to intern at the ranch. A nonprofit from Texas offered to sponsor scholarships for children with animal rescue ideas. On one condition, the scholarship had to bear Cedar's name. When Dr. Easton asked the group for their thoughts, Maisie raised her hand. "If it has Cedar's name, then my name has to be on it too." Sam and Laura looked at each other and smiled. Weeks later, a small sign was nailed to the front office. The Cedar Hope Fellowship. Inspired by Maisie Carter, age 6. Cedar no longer needed the rig. He walked freely now each morning, sometimes even breaking into a light trot. But what touched everyone most was how he treated other horses. Especially Percy, the injured horse from Utah. Whenever Percy entered the field, Cedar trotted toward him. If Percy panicked, Cedar would nuzzle his mane. If Percy tried to walk, Cedar slowed his pace to walk beside him. One afternoon, Laura said softly, "Cedar's not just a student anymore. He's a teacher." Sam nodded slowly, whispering more to himself than anyone else. Maybe only those who've fallen and risen again can guide the ones still afraid to move. That evening, the sun lingered a little longer. Amber light spilled across the field, touching the roof, the fence line, and Cedar's alert ears. Maisie sat nearby, sketchbook in her lap. She was drawing Cedar, this time in a superhero cape, flying through the clouds with hundreds of horses behind him. Cedar turned, glanced at the drawing, and stepped closer, nuzzling her tangled hair. Maisie giggled, threw her arms around his neck and whispered, "Tomorrow, I'm teaching you how to fly." And maybe no one at Blue Pine Ranch doubted she could. Because Cedar, the horse who once couldn't stand, had now learned how to help others take their first steps. The air that day was as cold as it had been 1 year ago. Winds rolled down from the San Francisco peaks, sweeping through dark pines, across the golden prairie, and over the humble wooden fences of Blue Pine Ranch. But unlike the lonely chill of the year before, today's cold carried laughter, hoofbeats drumming over frozen earth, and the soft chime of wind bells outside the newly finished rehab wing. The front sign had been freshly painted. In bold white letters it read, "Blue Pine Center, where steps begin again." Below it, smaller but impossible to miss, inspired by Cedar and Maisie. In the main yard, a group of bundled-up children knelt on the stone walkway, sketching with chalk. One drew a flying horse, another, a wheelchair with wings, another, a horse rearing up on two front legs, lifting a curly-haired girl into the sky. These weren't just drawings, they were symbols. Of Cedar, of Maisie, and what they had come to mean not just to Ashfork, but to families all across America. Over the past year, 23 horses had arrived from across the country: Texas, Montana, California. Some were treated, some simply came to remember how to be alive. Nearly 40 children, many paralyzed, some with cerebral palsy, had gone through Blue Pine's special program. Most still couldn't walk, but every one of them smiled whenever Cedar approached. Maisie was now 7, still small for her age, still wrapped in a jacket too big, still carrying a sketchbook bursting with wild ideas. But now, she wasn't just Cedar's companion. She was a guide for newcomers. She didn't teach with lectures. She taught by reaching out a hand, by showing others how to feel a horse not with strength, but with trust. One April morning, she sat beside a new boy from New Mexico. His name was Eli. A car accident had left him unable to walk. Eli barely spoke, not even to his mother. Maisie sat beside his wheelchair, placed her hand gently over his, and pointed toward Cedar, grazing nearby. "He couldn't stand either," she whispered. "He used to shake all over and couldn't even lift his head." Eli said nothing. But when Cedar walked up and pressed his nose to Eli's knee, the boy burst into tears. They didn't speak the rest of the afternoon. But later, Eli's mother would say it was the first time he nodded when asked, "Do you want to try?" The Hope rig now had 11 working replicas, each one improved from the original blueprint. Dr. Easton partnered with 3 veterinary universities, launching a program called Mustang Revival, blending physical rehab, emotional therapy, and human-animal connection. Trent and Benji formed a non-profit engineering team, developing portable devices for injured horses and wild rescues. Sam no longer ran the ranch alone. He had learned to share, not just chores but hope. One evening, he told Laura about the day Cedar fell. "I thought if I gave up that day," Laura squeezed his hand, "then none of this would have happened. But you didn't. And now, look around." They turned toward the barn, where Cedar now stood next to a newborn foal. Cedar no longer moved like he once had. But he didn't need to. He had become the spirit of the place, the heartbeat of the ranch. Each morning, Cedar walked the rehab grounds, spending his days beside horses who had just arrived, watching, listening, simply being there. People say horses can't speak, but here, everyone believed Cedar could listen. He didn't need to neigh or nod. He just had to stand still. Strong, calm. A living reminder that what seemed impossible wasn't. Cedar was once the horse who couldn't stand. Now he was a symbol of survival, of resilience, of hope. In late April, a small gathering was held at the ranch. They called it Cedar Day. No press, no banners, just people who had once visited, stayed, or been changed by this place. Eli rolled himself on his own for the first time to stand beside Cedar. A girl from Seattle gave Cedar a lavender wreath. A veteran who had battled PTSD and spent 6 months here with his traumatized horse cried as he wrapped his arms around Cedar's neck. Sam gave a short speech, his voice shaky, but full of strength. "We've learned that miracles don't always shout. Sometimes a miracle is just when a soul who shouldn't have made it raises its head again." Dr. Easton followed. "And that miracle lives on, in every horse, every child, every person who walks through these gates, looking to reclaim what they thought was lost." That evening, Maisie sat on the fence, sketching in the fading light. The sun poured its last golden rays across the pasture, bathing both her and Cedar in soft amber. "You know what?" she whispered. "Next year, I'm going to build us a robot horse that takes both of us flying." Cedar gave a soft whinny, almost like a laugh. And in that moment, all the pain, all the scars, all the limits faded into the background. Because here, on this land that once raised horses just to race, now stood a sanctuary where the unimaginable began. A place where one little girl and one broken horse didn't just get back up, they lifted a whole world with them. If you believe that a 6-year-old girl could save a life the world had already given up on, then the kindness in your heart is still very much alive. Leave a comment, something simple. Just a 0 or a 1 is enough, to let us know you're here, listening, and feeling this with us. And don't forget to subscribe to True Animal Stories, where every story is proof that when humans and animals connect from the heart, miracles will always find a way. We'll see you in the next story, where love will once again do the impossible.